We're going to talk now about the many diverse and fascinating ways that animals communicate with each other. But before we do that, I just need to warn you that it's going to be tempting to think that these are forms of language. We're going to learn later on in this section why that's not the case, why we can't call these forms of communication language. But before we debunk that thought, I just want to give you a taste of flavor for all the different fascinating kinds of things that animals have been shown to be able to do. As a first example, this dog, Stella, is owned by a speech therapist who works teaching children how to communicate with their families using tablets that they can push buttons on to communicate sentences to those who are their caretakers. Now, she made a giant speech board for her dog with buttons that the dog could use its paw to press. This dog has been able to say sentences like, "Want Jake come." This is a sentence that he used to communicate what he was spinning around at the door for. His owner thought originally that he wanted to go outside and go potty or something like that, but when she asked what was going on, then the dog went over and spelled out that the reason why he was pacing at the door is because he wanted her fiance Jake to come home, not because he wanted to go out. But at other times he has asked to go out. He would say things like, "Happy ball, want outside," or sometimes "play outside," "toy ball want." Sometimes, if he's tired of his owner laying on the couch or on the bed and being lazy, then he'll tell her, "Bed all done, come outside." He's also able to communicate when he needs help, that he needs to eat, that he needs water, that he's feeling happy, or that he's feeling mad. Another example of animal communication is this bird called Alex. This is the gray parrot of an animal psychologist. And Alex was trained to be able to solve certain puzzles, and Alex's communication abilities were sophisticated and impressive, but his owner never described him as being able to use language, because mostly he was trained to be able to solve different kinds of puzzles and answer certain kinds of questions by identifying different objects and quantities, being able to count things. He could distinguish different colors and shapes, and he understood concepts like which one is bigger and smaller, whether they're the same or different, which one's over or under. And at one point he called an apple a banary, a combination of a banana and a cherry, which were fruits that he was more familiar with. As a third example, Coco was a gorilla owned by and cared for by an animal psychologist who ended up learning over 1,000 signs and understood an additional 2,000 or so spoken words in English. Interestingly, Coco had a nipple fixation. He wanted to see everybody's nipples, whether they were male or female, and ended up getting in trouble pretty often when people felt compelled to show them because he was so fixated on them. As a young undergraduate student, I used to work in the CHCI lab, the Chimpanzee and Human Communication Institute, that was centered at Central Washington University. And of course, if you're familiar with this lab, originally there were 5 signing chimpanzees who had been trained to use signs from sign language to communicate with their human caretakers and with each other. The original purpose of this experiment was to see if animals who were cross-fostered, this is a concept where animals are raised by humans as if they were infants, human infants, and just treated like human infants and talked to like they were human infants, if they could pick up language in the same way that human infants pick up language. And it was discovered that they were able to master many signs in a naturalistic way without any advanced or elaborate training, but they were never able to use advanced language. Their linguistic capabilities, like those of most of the animals that I've described so far and that will be talked about in the text, were only ever advanced to about a 2 to a 5-year-old level, which is like a toddler elementary kind of level of language. It's not very sophisticated, but it is impressive that they can string together sentences nevertheless. The reason why I raised this issue is because while Coco had a nipple fixation, there were some chimpanzees at the CHCI lab who had other kinds of fixations. Like Lulis was very into hats and hoods. If you walked by the lab while he was outside and you happened to be wearing a hat or a hood, then he would sometimes masturbate because he really got off on the look of that. And other chimpanzees, like Dar, really liked your feet, and he really just wanted to always see people's bare feet, so he would ask them to take off their shoes and socks, and then he would kind of put his feet up to the glass, and you'd put yours there too. And of course, there were other quirks that the chimpanzees had. Each one had their own personality. Some of them liked to paint. Some of them liked to wear clothes. And they all had different lingo. There was one chimpanzee named Tatu who used to sign the word black as if it were a synonym to the word cool. That's how she intended it to be taken. So whenever she liked something, she would sign the word black. Now, the reason I'm communicating about these different linguistic abilities of animals is to demonstrate the varied and fascinating ways in which they communicate to each other. And I'm going to now take a break, and I'm going to let you watch some examples of how this looks in real life, and then I'm going to pick up the lecture again and talk about why these aren't examples of language and how we can discern the difference between animal communication and human language.